Warning, the following episode contains discussions about violent crimes, disturbing events, and explicit details that may be unsettling for some listeners. Please be advised that this podcast is not suitable for young children, and listener discretion is strongly advised.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Southern Shadows, a mother-son true crime podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Janet, aka Mama.
And I'm DK.
And the story that I have for you today is one that highlights one of my worst fears for you when you head off to college and you're on your own. Especially considering that some of your college choices include being on the West Coast, thousands of miles away from home. You're going to meet new people, you're going to make new friendships, and as you get older, you're going to learn the types of people that you don't want to be around. Just like our case today, when a 19-year-old student in the Job Corps on the campus of the University of Tennessee calls home to tell her mom that someone broke into her dorm and stood over her with a knife, just staring. She never named the student, but when she tried to report it to a supervisor, he brushed it off and didn't take action. Eventually, that 19-year-old would accept an invitation to her death by a known Satanist and her friends. This is the story of Colleen Slemmer and Christa Pike. So I know we've talked about the potential colleges that you want to attend because you want to pursue baseball, but is there another career or what are you thinking about studying?
I'm into sports marketing and sports analyst, just something that keeps me around sports.
Nice. Well, college isn't for everyone and that's okay. I'm sure you've heard of vocational training that helps people build specific skills that they can use towards a career, right?
Yeah, the culinary classes I'm taking. Well, my teacher is a professional chef, so if I wanted to pursue that, he could teach me. And I also have a friend that's pursuing a welding job, I think it is, and I know he can make a lot of money from that.
Yeah, exactly. Vocational training is still an opportunity for people to make a great living. It's not necessarily one of those careers that in our society we glorify, like being a doctor or a lawyer, because that's not easy. Not everyone can do it. But training in a specific trade, you can still earn as much as those professions. Which brings us to the 1990s, where a popular vocational program called Job Corps in Knoxville, Tennessee, was offering students a chance to learn skills that they needed to start a career in a non-traditional way.
Knoxville, Tennessee, known as the Marble City, is located on the Tennessee River in the eastern part of the state, with a population of approximately 200,000. It is 180 miles from the capital of Nashville and is home to the University of Tennessee. It's here where Colleen Slemmer meets Christa Pike and Tadaryl Shipp, ultimately resulting in an untimely demise.
Have you heard of the Job Corps before?
No.
Well, technically, it's a government program that's offered to young people as early as 16 years old and as old as 24. And from their website, the students are primarily those who come from low-income families, are at risk of dropping out of school or have already dropped out of school, or face other challenges that might stop them from finding a job. It's similar to going to college because they live in free housing, they receive meals, they get basic medical care, and they receive a living allowance. So let's talk about our main characters. Christa Pike, 19, Tadaryl Shipp, 17, and Colleen Slemmer, 19, and how they ended up in Knoxville for the Job Corps. Christa Gail Pike was born on March 10, 1976, in West Virginia to parents Carissa and Glenn Pike. Her mother, Carissa, was a nurse, but she struggled with alcoholism. When she was born, Christa actually had to spend a few days in the NICU due to some developmental concerns with her brain due to the alcohol that her mother was drinking while she was pregnant with her. Throughout her childhood, Christa was bounced around between family members, eventually spending most of her time raised by her devout Christian grandmother. During this time, she unfortunately experiences both physical and sexual abuse at the hands of some of her mom's partners, who, although didn't necessarily take care of her full time, was often around her. In fact, Carissa, her mom, had been married a total of 4 times, and also dated many other men in between. In one situation, charges were filed against one of her boyfriends, who punched Christa in the face when she was young. Being with her grandmother offered Christa more stability, but unfortunately, it wouldn't be for long because she passed away when Christa was 12 years old. As you can imagine, this was devastating for Christa, who began to suffer from depression, even attempting to take her own life and turning to drugs and alcohol in her teens. After the death of her sole caretaker and provider, she has to move back in her mother's care, where the relationship is strained, to say the least. She even smokes weed with her mom on several occasions, something that her mom would describe later as a way to try and bond with her daughter.
How did that work out?
Well, it definitely didn't help, and Christa continued to act out, even spending some time in juvenile detention for shoplifting. Surprisingly, there was some good that came out of it though, because it's here where she finally received some support through counseling and therapists.
You can get counselors in jail?
Yeah, actually, jail is supposed to be a form of rehab. For most people, it's supposed to give you sort of like a timeout so that you can pay for the crime that you committed, but eventually the goal is to be back in society having changed your ways. Obviously, there's different levels of offenders, but definitely as a juvenile, it's supposed to help you become a better adult. So many times they actually have mandatory counseling and therapy sessions.
Okay.
Eventually, Christa starts to see a future for herself when she learns about the Job Corps at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. At this point, she was a 9th grade dropout, but she enrolled hoping to become a nurse like her mom. Although her future seemed promising, the destructive environment that this Job Corps site provided would end up being Christa's downfall. When she arrived, Christa met 17-year-old Tadaryl Shipp, a culinary arts student from Memphis, Tennessee, with a similar background. He too had a childhood filled with abuse and even had some gang affiliation. They were quickly taken with each other and entered into a relationship. In an interview for a documentary produced by WeTV, Christa herself says,
Tadaryl was respected, if not feared. He protected me. He was probably the first man that I'd ever had in my life that wanted to protect me, that saw me as, a treasure, something good instead of something to use and toss to the side.
Finally finding someone who treated her like this, Christa was all in. Tadaryl did have some violent tendencies, and allegedly he was into Satanism and was supposedly part of a satanic cult. Christa even started to call herself Little Devil and got it tattooed on her body to show Tadaryl how devoted she was to him. She also becomes fast friends with Shadolla Peterson. There isn't much information on her other than her involvement in the incident that brings us here today. But both of the girls were influenced by Tadaryl's Satanism, and the three would often hang out together. Another student in the program was Colleen Slemmer, who was born September 20th, 1975 in Pennsylvania. When her parents divorced, her mother May moved to Jacksonville, Florida, and remarried a man named Raul Martinez. Colleen was really close with Raul, but she also continued to visit her real father whenever she could. Like Christa, Colleen had dropped out of school in the 9th grade, but it was due to a reading disability that made school difficult for her. Working fast food jobs just weren't enough, so she decided to pursue her GED. You're familiar with the GED?
Yeah, like a second chance for high school, but instead of going to school, you just take tests, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a way for people like Colleen and Christa, who dropped out of high school, to have an opportunity at a more secure future, because most jobs do require at least a high school diploma or a GED. So Colleen hears about the Job Corps at the University of Tennessee, where she could live and work towards getting her GED and even receive vocational training. She was eager to start working towards a better future for herself. In the podcast episode, Southern Fried True Crime, the host Erica Kelly discusses how shortly after arriving in Knoxville, Colleen called her mother disappointed about the campus, mentioning the graffiti-covered walls and the fact that there was very little supervision over the students. She even had some of her things stolen out of her room. One of the worst things that any mother wants to hear, let alone one that has a child so far away from home, is that there were 3 students that were stalking and bullying her. Colleen even tells her mom that, shockingly, one of those students entered her room in the middle of the night and just stood over her with a knife. She told her mom that this girl was accusing her of wanting her boyfriend, but she swore she didn't want anything to do with him. Her mom, May, reports that Colleen never named any of these 3 students, but her mom told her to report it to the Job Corps counselors immediately. When she followed up with Colleen about the incident later on, she told her mom that the counselor just brushed it off like it wasn't a big deal.
Wait, so all of these students that are in this program, they stay on a college campus?
Exactly, but they have supervisors, because remember, you can be as young as 16 in this program, which is not considered an adult. So they have these counselors that are supposed to make sure that they stay on task and they monitor the students as they're going through the program.
Yeah.
Although she was being targeted by a few bullies, Colleen did have her own group of friends. It's unclear if she even knew Christa or if she was one of the bullies that she wouldn't name to her mom. But soon a rumor started to circulate that Colleen liked Tadaryl. Some even say that the two hooked up, and Tadaryl would claim that it was true. He would later say that it was during Thanksgiving break and Christa had gone home to be with family, but Tadaryl and Colleen stayed on campus. This did not sit well with Christa, who was extremely possessive, so when she hears this, she becomes enraged. One day, she even tells a friend named Kim Elola that she was planning to kill Colleen because she felt mean that day. Whether this rumor was true or not, Colleen Slemmer would soon fall victim to one of the most heinous acts committed in Tennessee. On January 12, 1995, in a seemingly innocent attempt at squashing any beef between the two girls, Christa invited Colleen to hang out and smoke some weed that she said she hid in the woods near campus. Also coming to hang out was Tadaryl and Shadolla, because it was said once again that the 3 were inseparable. The group of 4 signs out of the dorms around 8 p.m. and proceeded to go to an isolated location in a wooded area called Tyson Park. Christa told Colleen that the weed was hidden in this area so that they wouldn't get in trouble in the dorms. As they got closer to the location, Colleen felt like something wasn't right. It turned out she'd been tricked into going with them. You see, Christa wasn't actually trying to make amends, and her jealousy and suspicion was the fuel to the fire that she was about to set. It's said that when they got deep into the woods, she started to accuse Colleen of trying to steal Tadaryl from her and began physically assaulting her, grabbing her head and slamming it on her knee, throwing her to the ground, punching and kicking her.
I wanted to get her off campus, and I had every intention of fighting her.
Tadaryl even joins in a few times while Shadolla played lookout. On the YouTube channel Explore With Us, the host reveals that Tadaryl was quoted as telling a friend a few days prior to the incident that he had to make a human sacrifice because the celestial bodies were in alignment. Whether this was the moment that he chose to act on it is unclear. But what is clear is that he helped Christa torture Colleen for more than 30 minutes.
Wait, so going back to the fact that she told her mom that she had been stalked and bullied by 3 people, did anybody ever figure out that it was these 3?
It's never officially confirmed in any of the sources that I read, but I think we can make an educated guess.
Yeah.
At some point, Colleen cried out, "Why are you doing this to me?" But the blows kept coming. Throughout the torture, she was able to get up and try to get away more than once, but Christa or Tadaryl kept pulling her back or pushing her down. Then, Christa eventually pulled out a box cutter and a small meat cleaver that she got from the school's kitchen, and slashes Colleen anywhere she could. This included her arms, back, and throat. Colleen continues to beg for her life, even saying that if they let her go, quote, she'd walk all the way back to Florida and not even stop at her dorm to get her things. By her own account, Christa said that she kicked Colleen in the face more and more to get her to stop talking. She even made a comment to her friends, quote, "The bitch won't die." There's a moment where Christa does stop because she thinks that she hears something or someone and leaves to go check it out. You would think that this would be Colleen's chance to escape, but she's kept there by Tadaryl and Shadolla. When Christa returns, she cuts Colleen's throat several more times. Remarkably, Colleen was still able to plead for her life and try to run. That's when Christa picked up a rock and threw it at her, hitting her in the back of the head. At some point, Shadolla finally speaks up and tells them that they've gone too far, and if they don't stop, they're going to go to jail. It was in this moment that Christa later says is what made her decide that Colleen had to die. At some point towards the end of the torture, Tadaryl takes the box cutter and carves a pentagram into Colleen's chest.
Is that the symbol with, like, the star?
Yeah, the 5-pointed star that's enclosed in a circle. It's been used as a symbol for various purposes throughout history, but it's mostly been tied to Satanism, which makes sense considering he was a known Satanist. Sadly, a medical examiner would later testify that she was still alive when all of this happened. What finally put her out of her misery was when Christa picked up a large rock and repeatedly struck her in the head, causing pieces of her skull to break off, and after close to an hour, Colleen finally died. While Shadolla keeps watch, Christa and Tadaryl drag her body away to try and hide it in a nearby area. Before they leave the scene, Christa decides to pick up a piece of Colleen's fragmented skull and put it in her jacket pocket as a trophy.
That's disgusting.
Yeah, just wait. The 3 friends then walked to a nearby gas station to get rid of Colleen's belongings like her ID cards, and they returned to the dorms at around 10 p.m. Either it was the rush of adrenaline or whatever, but Christa visited that same friend, Kim, again, and was said to have bragged about the horrific crime that she just committed and was said to be dancing around and singing about it. She even showed Kim the piece of skull that she'd taken with her. Whether it was because she didn't believe her or she was afraid of her, Kim doesn't report Christa to anyone at this point. The next morning, Colleen's remains are discovered by a university employee who immediately called the cops. Knoxville police and university campus police arrive at 8 a.m. on Friday the 13th to secure the area in Tyson Park. Colleen's face had been mangled so badly that they could not initially identify her, and without any ID, the only thing that they could do was compare her dental records. That would ultimately be how they were able to identify the victim as 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer.
Why would they use dental records?
Well, just like how your fingerprints are unique to you, your teeth have their own special features. You know how every time you go to the dentist, they take x-rays?
Yeah.
Well, they're storing that information, and that can be used to figure out who a person is.
It makes sense.
Initially, that Kim girl, who didn't report Christa to the police, later contacted them when she realized how serious the situation had become. She tells authorities that Christa had visited her after the incident, and that's how we know that she'd been bragging and dancing and singing around the room. Apparently, Kim wasn't the only person, though, that she had been bragging to, and more people started to come forward to report her. Christa, in all of her audacity, made the mistake of leaving her jacket behind in an administrator's office, who ended up turning it over to the police. Sure enough, when they searched the pockets, they find the piece of skull that she had been carrying around. All 3 students, Christa Pike, Tadaryl Shipp, and Shadolla Peterson, were arrested within 36 hours of the murder. Christa, obviously unable to help herself, decided to waive her Miranda rights and admitted to killing Colleen.
Why?
Have you ever paid attention in shows where police say, like, you have the right to remain silent and give, like, that whole speech? Those are called Miranda rights, and essentially if you waive them like she did, you're basically saying, I know my rights, but I'm going to choose to talk to you anyway without a lawyer, and I'm willing to answer questions. You can choose to stop talking to them whenever you want and request a lawyer even after you've waived your Miranda rights, and the interview has to immediately stop.
Okay.
In this case, Christa was more than happy to share all of the horrendous details about what she and her 2 friends put Colleen through. Her entire confession is recorded and typed out and was a total of 42 pages long. It's not like they really needed it though, because Colleen's blood was found on the jeans that Christa wore that night, on her shoes, and on her jacket. She also led investigators back to the gas station where they located Colleen's ID cards. In that same podcast episode of Southern Fried True Crime, the host Erica Kelly spoke with the detective who testified at Christa's trial, Detective Randy York. He was the detective that took her back to the scene of the crime so that they could get a more complete picture of what happened. He described her as being bored and impatient, but then excited, like she was enjoying reliving the murder. In that same WeTV documentary, he even says,
I've never been in the presence of anyone I thought was pure evil, but to me she's pure evil. Through one of the psychiatrists, come out with the opinion that she had all the profile of being a serial killer, but probably got caught her first time.
On March 22nd, 1996, almost a year after Colleen Slemmer was found in the woods, Christa Pike was on trial for murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The courtroom was full of media, and Christa seemed to eat up the attention. She was seen looking back at the audience and reporters, laughing, joking, and sending notes to her mom and lawyer. However, she did show emotion and cried when the prosecutors played her entire 45-minute confession for the court.
I just couldn't with her, and she was just going, please don't. I said, shut up, I don't want to talk to you, I don't want you to talk to me. I said, I just want to find some way to get out of this. I said, it's gone too far. I didn't need to do what I've done so far.
Her attorneys, Kelly Gleason and Randy Spivey, argued that Pike was suffering from severe, untreated mental illness and intense trauma that she developed as a young child, and this is why she didn't really know what she was doing at the time of the crime. The defense tried to claim that Christa, due to birth defects and years of childhood abuse, was not sane enough to know what she was doing. In fact, according to mercyforchrista.org, a website that's dedicated to advocating for a lighter sentence for Christa, claims that she was born with organic brain damage that caused her to have seizures as an infant. It also claims that because of the, quote, almost unbearably abusive background, that led her to attempt suicide, her diagnosis of depression and bipolar disorder are the reasons why she wasn't sane enough to fully comprehend her actions. But in that Southern Fried True Crime episode, the host talks about how a clinical psychologist was brought in to evaluate Christa. This is normal whenever they have extreme cases like this. They actually bring in a professional to evaluate the person to decide whether or not they're sane to stand trial. Dr. Eric Ingram testified for the defense, and although he acknowledges that she showed behavior that was characteristic of borderline personality disorder, he did not indicate that she would need to be institutionalized. But she does struggle to control her behavior in relationships. She also did not show any evidence of brain damage, and she was not insane. All of these points are important to prove if you're trying to secure the death penalty. Basically, due to her personality disorder, she simply just lost control. It took the jury only 3 hours to deliberate before they decided that she was guilty of murder. The next phase was to decide exactly what her punishment would be during her sentencing. At her sentencing, the district attorney wanted Christa executed, which is rare for a woman, especially one as young as her. And women hadn't been executed in Tennessee since 1837. Do you know about the death penalty?
Yeah, it's the penalty where they kill you.
Yeah, it's a little bit more complex than that. I mean, it is an extremely hot topic with strong opinions on both sides, and it's based on, ethical, moral, and practical considerations, but it's typically reserved for the most serious offenses, such as murder or acts of terrorism. As a matter of fact, the death penalty is only legal in 27 states today. And in Tennessee, there's currently a hold on all executions. So anybody who was convicted to die, there's a hold on it right now.
Yeah.
After only an hour and a half of deliberation, the jury reached their decision of death by execution. Christa would be the youngest woman on death row in Tennessee. But her story doesn't end here. The day after she's taken in officially to begin serving her sentence, the guards confiscated a letter that she wrote to her boyfriend Tadaryl. And this is what it said. "You see what I get for trying to be nice to that hoe? I went ahead and bashed her brains out so that she'd die quickly instead of letting her bleed to death and suffer more, and they effing fry me." There's a lot more in the letter, but at the end of it, she signed the letter, Lil Devil. Speaking of Tadaryl, he was sentenced to life in prison. At the time, he was 17, so the death penalty wasn't an option for him, since he was considered a minor. Shadolla Peterson, who fully cooperated with the authorities, was sentenced to several years probation. Also, the fact that Colleen's DNA was not found on her, that's why she received a lighter sentence. It's up for debate whether or not the sentencing is fair, considering she didn't do anything to stop it. 5 years into her sentence, Christa got into it with another inmate, Patricia Jones, who was serving a life sentence for killing an 84-year-old woman. She claims that it was self-defense because the inmate had been, quote, torturing her. Ironic, right?
Right.
This inmate had supposedly threatened her friend, Natasha Cornett, another Satanist that was serving 3 life sentences for kidnapping and murder. We're going to cover this in a future episode. But during an altercation, Christa choked Patricia with a shoestring. She was given an additional charge of attempted murder. Did you know that people who are serving time in jail can actually get charged with additional crimes while they're serving time for a crime?
Yeah, I think I have heard of that before.
Yeah, so it could potentially add more to your current sentence, but I guess at this point, Christa had nothing left to lose. Meanwhile, her attorneys were trying to appeal her death sentence. After the altercation with Patricia, she wrote a letter begging to drop all of the appeals, basically just accepting her fate. When a judge finally sets a date, August 19th, she cries and is dramatic and thanks the judge.
It's okay, Mommy.
Then, a few days later, she changes her mind. The constant back and forth would continue for several years, and in 2005, Christa Pike's death sentence was affirmed by the court. Then, a few days later, she changed her mind. In that WeTV documentary, she basically says that she doesn't feel like she has to die for something that 3 people did.
I did something horrible that is unacceptable, and I realize that. But I don't deserve to die for the actions of 3 individuals.
The constant back and forth would continue for several years, and in 2005, Christa Pike's death sentence was affirmed by the court with no execution date that has been set. As of November 2023, the Tennessee Supreme Court still has no date set for Pike, who is the only woman on death row and the last person sentenced to death in Tennessee that was 18 at the time of their crime. Christa's mom has even continued advocating for her daughter and believes that she should not be put to death because she doesn't think that it's fair that Tadaryl and Shadolla received lighter sentences. Christa stands behind that same belief and continues to appeal her death sentence, hoping for a lesser charge of life in prison. So that's the story of Christa Pike, Tadaryl Shipp, and Shadolla Peterson. Any thoughts?
It's kind of scary because this just shows you that you really don't know the true intent behind people. Colleen could have seen them as making new friends by going into the woods and hanging out. But little did she know she would be killed by these 3 people. And it's sad that her mother had to send her daughter off not knowing that she was safe. And then it ended up in her daughter being taken from her. And like I said, it's just scary.
Obviously, we can't change the events that happened, but if these were the 3 people that she had refused to name, in the beginning, I just hope that this is a lesson to anyone listening that, you got to say something so that you can get the help that you need. And whoever the counselor was that kind of brushed her off, I just hope that, moving forward, maybe there was more training that happened. I don't know, so that they could know how to handle situations. And, to anyone that if you're experiencing bullying or you know of somebody being bullied, that, you would take the right steps to help that person out. And as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode by leaving a comment down below our YouTube or sending us a message at southernshadowspodcast.com, where you can also find all of the source notes available for today's episode.
Also, don't forget to like, comment, and share. And until next week, see you in the shadows.